Taylor, can I pass to you, please, just to kind of open us up on this particular topic?
For sure. So, hi everyone, I'm Taylor Hahn. I work for a high growth startup. We're about 2 years in. It's called Applied Value Technologies. And actually, I know Chris because we engaged with him in the very beginning to help us with recruiting, which was a tremendous help. I was probably like the 12th employee, and now we're about 115. So things are going well. But anyways, he engaged with me to let me know about HR Connect, and we talked about some of the hot topics, and this was one that I've been working on actually the last few months, and I know all too much about HRIS, HCM. Honestly, I still don't know the difference between those, so I call it HRIS. But I've done a lot of research on these over the last few years at this company and my previous company. So yeah, it's a lot of work. I think it's something that takes a lot of time and research because especially now, there's so many different components, I feel like. And to your point earlier, Chris, I don't know if this was kind of before we started, but just like how many different systems people use to, complete all the HR functionalities. So there could be performance that's separate from onboarding, that's separate from, all the different pieces, right? And so I think like one of the things that's happening and probably has been for a while, but just like that all-in-one approach, which I think is great, which I don't think people used to want to do because they didn't trust that that all the pieces would work well enough, right? Like this company's really good at this and this company's really good at this, but they're not good at all the things. And I think the companies have realized like we need to be good at all the things because people don't want 10 different systems, right? Like right now we even have an HRIS and payroll separate, which I hate, but like what a poor employee experience from my perspective of like, oh, you go to the HRIS for all these things and you do your time off and this is where your personnel file is, but then you have to go over here for payroll. So I think that's really what we were looking for. So we actually are on Rippling currently. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but we're actually switching and we've chosen Paycor. And one of the reasons for that is because it has this all-in-one approach and has really all of the pieces that we need and going through probably 10 different demos to like look at each piece in depth. We made the decision that that was the right way to move forward. And we're also getting rid of our performance and we're going to be saving some money. So I don't know, but like also to your point, Chris, of like now there's all this AI stuff in HR, right? Like I haven't seen a ton of that so far, but I know that that's coming and that's kind of the way as we move forward. So I'm super interested to kind of see how that all comes to fruition. But some other things I think that have been really important in our selection as well is like the APIs, the integrations with like, we have Sage Intacct for the financial piece and being able to have these really deep integrations that are 360 is super helpful because automation is really the name of the game as you continue to grow, right? Like stopping the manual work, being able to trust the automation. So that's a big one. And really like user friendly, what I call kind of like a sexy UI. That's super important to me, right? Like I want my employees to go on there and be like, there's not too much going on. It's easy to use. It looks good. And then mobile first. So that's like a big thing I think that's really important for people on the go, right? Like we're in front of our computers all day, but like when we leave, we want to be able to go check our pay stub or do our time off or whatever in an app. So I don't know. That's kind of my experience. And I'm excited. We actually kick off with Paycor 1.1. I don't know if anyone has used Paycor. It might be more of like a US thing, but that's also another challenge is we have an international team and finding something that has everything you want and need, but can also do all the international stuff. So
That's good. Taylor, can I ask you a couple of questions off the back
for
of this?
sure. Yeah.
You've mentioned a couple of different technologies that you use, or that you use, Rippling, Paycor, 1.1, and so on. But when you're looking at different technologies, what kind of things are you considering when you're looking to decide on what technology stack works kind of best for you? Other than obviously, like you said, every technology can't do everything at the moment.
Yeah.
So what kind of things are you considering when you're making those buying decisions?
Yeah, and I honestly have like struggled with like what's the right approach. Like, you make a list of requirements. I actually like created a question list that was over 100 questions and I said, because Paylocity was the other one we were looking at. And I sent it to both vendors and I said, hey, I need you to answer these. And then, based on your answers, we can then dig into the ones that I don't like or that don't align with what we need. And you really have to kind of create like must have versus like want to have, like what's nice to have. And I think that's the most important is like, okay, this is what we need to have. So these are deal breakers. And then there's like a whole list of nice to haves, which like this would make my life easier. This would make my team's life easier. But literally we had like 110 questions. And for me, it was like, every time that I was doing something in Rippling that I was like, oh, I wish this was different, I would write something down. Or like you have to like get in this mindset of like, or go through the employee experience or day-to-day life of like, oh, when this doesn't work, or oh, I wish I had this, or so it's a process, right? And like you're not going to remember everything and you're not going to get to see everything and you're not going to to your point, like no platform is perfect, right? But to try to get through as much as you can, because I think what we did with Rippling like a year and a half ago was, well, and we were also a different company back then, so I didn't know exactly what we needed. So we did what we could and we got Rippling and it was great for what it did, but we outgrew that pretty quickly. And it was like, okay, now we know what we need. We know kind of where we're headed and what kind of things we need as we move forward. And so just kind of like making a list and then maybe putting that into questions. And again, I think that list of requirements versus nice to haves is super important when you're assessing.
Did you consider? Sorry, go on.
No, I just a couple of thoughts I'd love to add on to that because I think you're spot on, right? So, and I think you raised a really interesting point about outgrowing. So super important to kind of think about, where the company's going to be. You also mentioned international, right? So where's the company growing to? What, how is the company going to grow organically or through acquisition? Because that will have some impact on what you're looking at. And what I've seen over the years be really, really effective is kind of some scenario-based evaluations. So like what are some, and you were sort of alluding to that as well. What are some of the things that are particularly unique to your organization or that you do differently or that give you kind of that competitive advantage? And make sure you ask the vendors about those, because to a certain extent, they're all going to do, kind of the basic personnel information stuff. They're all going to do some of the basics, but really hone in on the things that make your company different and unique and ask them to scenario-based demo that, to your point. So.
Absolutely. And I would say that like, I don't want this to sound bad, but also like digging in. So like when I ask a question and they just say, yes, like, yes, we can do that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to need some context, or I'm going to need you to show me that, because it sounds bad, but like you're talking to a salesperson too. So they're going to, and that's the other thing is like, they'll all say and promise you the world. And then you get it and you're in there and you're like, oh, huh. And then you say something, they're like, oh, well, what I meant was, so it's like, make sure to drill into that, because that happened a lot where it was like, yeah, we can do that. But then it was like, well, show me. So I would do that with all of them and be like, okay, well, let's get on another demo and show me how that works. Or, you know what I mean? So that sounds bad, but like, just this journey it's a big one. It's an important one, right? And it's not something you want to switch. Like we only had one for a year and a half, but again, we were, 4 months in at that point. So it kind of makes sense. But after this decision, I don't want to do this again for years,
Just on the back of that, Taylor, I was actually dovetails nicely onto a question I had. And Kathy, sorry, I didn't see that you had the hand thing up. Sorry, you were off my screen. The one question I had is, did you ever consider using kind of a third party to help you with the evaluation and buying? Because that was exactly going to be my question. You've obviously got salesperson, potential customer. We've seen this as a bit of a common theme, not just across technology, but buying decisions across, what employer of record to use or which, payroll provider to use. What, doesn't really matter. It's the same principle. But with technology being so much more complex, did you consider going down that route, or did you want to keep it all in-house?
I mean, that's a good question. So, and I don't know, Benny is definitely a US thing. They're a broker, but they also have like a free app for US benefits. We utilize them, and we actually have gotten some great deals with HRIS systems because of that partnership. They're really awesome, in case anyone in the US is curious. But so they actually have a technology team that I paired with and kind of talked through, like, because they work with so many different ones that they helped us. I don't know. Beyond that, I didn't really think about like hiring a company and like spending all this money. And I mean, I knew it was going to be a push, and I knew that like personally, I wanted to really be involved because I knew what we needed. Like, it was just this, like, I don't know. I felt really strongly about being a part of it and really being able to see what it could do and make that decision. So I didn't personally doesn't mean it wouldn't have been a good idea, and maybe it would have saved me some time. I don't know. I mean, for those of you that have gone that route, I'd be interested to know.
Just throwing that open. Has anyone actually
Yeah.
gone down that path before?
I actually
Debbie's
used to
not.
be a consultant that helped with it.
Really?
I'm
On
not
the
on the
other side of
consultant
the
side.
That's
Yeah, and I
interesting.
think to your point, right, I think from the consultant's perspective, it is kind of that, it's sort of that broker, right? He's kind of getting through, a good process, get through the sales crap, and no
Mhm.
disrespect to any
Yeah.
salespeople, right? But that's what they do, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of getting through that. It's helping to identify what those things that are really different and unique to you. And
Mhm.
certainly by no means cutting you out of the process, because at the end of the day, it's your decision, right? But a
Yeah.
good consultant will sort of help you navigate. I love that you used your other partner to help identify, because that's what a consultant will do as well, is kind of help you think about,
Yeah.
are there others that perhaps you haven't considered, who perhaps don't advertise everywhere, right? That
Sure.
might
Yeah.
be kind of an under the covers one kind of thing. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Hmm.
Very good point. We've often found that just from experience in other areas outside of the technology, that some of the best providers can be the ones that just don't have as big a marketing budget. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's a really interesting point.
Sure.
Debbie, did I see you nodding, saying that have you done? Okay, yeah, go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah, Mike and I are in the heat of the throes of all of this, Taylor. So we're
Oh,
feeling
bless
your
your heart.
pain. Yeah, so a year ago we were purchased by an equity firm, and
Oh,
we just threw in a benefits provider for the U.S. and
yeah.
that was Insperity, but it's only U.S. based.
Oh, used
So
Insperity
Mike,
before.
yeah, exactly. Mike and the rest of our team over in UK and beyond, had no resources. So
Yeah.
we're using Papaya. So we've got a lot of piecemeal stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I did
Papaya
reach
and
out to,
EOR. Sure.
yeah, I did reach out to PEO Spectrum, I believe is the name of the company. And they're pretty good. They follow through. They actually, and Trevor, they actually recommended Deal. So we're in negotiations with Deal for mid next year, hopefully, as long as they have all the pieces that we want. But based on what you said, Taylor, it's impossible to pick the right one the first year. It's just
Oh,
impossible.
yeah,
You just don't
exactly.
know.
No.
Yeah, you don't know until you start using it, until you start seeing the gaps. So
Yeah.
I love your idea of writing down the questions and asking for the beyond the yes, because Mike and I just had 2 phone calls back to back with salespeople, and it was disastrous, just disastrous. So,
I had that too.
they promised one thing, and then when we mentioned something else, they had this quizzical look on their face, but they, said, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it was
exactly.
just,
If they make that
yeah,
face, they have no idea. So,
no
um,
idea.
and also don't
So,
feel bad. I would say don't feel bad for having multiple meetings and demos. I'm not kidding when I say
right.
like with
Mhm.
Paycor, we had 10. And it was like, okay, here's the first round of questions. Let's break that down. I want to do another demo to see this. And then I wanted to it was
Yeah.
months long process. It's a big investment and a big decision. So
Yeah.
Deal. So Trevor, you're from Deal. We actually just
Mhm.
switched from Safeguard to Deal for our for EOR in some of the countries we're in. So I'm
Awesome.
excited.
I love to hear that, Taylor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to kind of maybe from my perspective, right? And I am a salesperson, and it's laughing at everything that you
No
guys are all saying,
offense.
right? No, and none is taken, right? I think that if you're not being a cautious consumer, that there's probably more of an issue than anything else, right? So definitely, I implore you to, at least from the perspective of Deal, take the demos, bother the hell out of us, ask us a ton of
Yeah.
questions, and if we're not being forthcoming with you, I think that that's a bigger issue, right? And we are, from an HRIS standpoint, we're only about 9-10 months into our HRIS venture, right?
Yeah.
Deal has been a contractor management platform, an EOR provider. That's always been our bread and butter, and we've recognized that there's needed to be this connective tissue that brings all the other services together, right? And we recognize that there are going to be scenarios where there's a company that's definitely more domestic in one country than they are international, and to provide them with an HRIS platform to manage all of their employees' information was something that we wanted to venture into. So to hear you guys all share like kind of what's gone into that thought process is something that we've heard quite a bit as well, right? Because candidly, we've fallen short in a lot of scenarios because it is a maturing tool, and we recognize that we don't have a lot of the things that people are interested in, right? And we've also taken this approach of we want to build as much in-house so that we can be as much of an all-in-one platform as possible. But our CEO, Alex, is an awesome guy. One of the things he talks about is from a partnerships and an integration standpoint, we want to be like the Apple and Apple App Store, but for HR tools, right? Future state, and we're talking here where, you know, if you want a performance evaluation tool, we'll have that as part of our HRIS. But if you're partial to using a more specific provider who focuses on that, we would be doing you a disservice as a customer to at least not offer the integration, right? Yeah. So I totally hear you in terms of bringing everything in-house, but I hope that more providers take that approach of allowing you to integrate some of your favorite tools. So yes, maybe they are siloed, but at least if they're communicating with each other, everybody's going to be better off for it.
Yeah.
Just on that, Taylor, coming back to your point earlier, and building on your point, Trevor, is that why you were sort of talking about API integrations and so forth and the importance of them, because nothing can do everything?
Sure. Yes. And, you know, that's the other thing too, is like, you know, when talking to Rippling and this was, you know, a year and a half ago or more, and I actually talked to them at my previous company, was like, you know, that was a thing because they were, I mean, they're still newer as well. And so they're still building out a lot of stuff. And even just since we've been there the last year and a half, now they're their own EOR and they do all these other things. But yeah, the connectivity. So, and they would say like, yes, we have an integration, but like, what does that integration look like? That's another question too, because like, how in depth is that? Like, and that's like something you don't really know to ask at first. You're like, oh, it has an integration, great. Like all the information flows. That is not true. Like, there's an integration with like Greenhouse, but it only brings over like their name and their email and the title. You know what I mean? So, so ask those questions as well. So because ideally you want a 360 integration. Sometimes there's a 180, but that just means it's going from one tool to Rippling, but the Rippling information doesn't go back, right? So that's also a good question, is if you do have those other tools, what does that integration look like? How deep is it, and what information flows to and from? Because you could think, oh, this is great, they have an integration, and then you get there and you're like, oh, well, that doesn't really help, you know? So that's something that we've learned as well. And so like for us, with Paycor, they actually use an external company that manages this 360 integration between Paycor and Sage Intacct, which for us, if that really works, like that's going to make so many people's lives easier at my company. So all automation.
Makes sense. Veronique, do you want to add anything here? Because I know that when you and I spoke, you commented on quite a number of these themes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually, I mean, Taylor, you mentioned it a couple of minutes ago about not just being domestic, but also looking at international. That's a piece where I've been struggling with a little bit. You know, get a lot of tools out there, HRIS, HCM systems, whatever it is, that will advertise. Yeah, we can do 200 countries. They're going to run out of countries at some point. Yeah. But then you start scratching the surface and you're like, okay, but what information is there? So to your point, sometimes it's such a skeleton information that is in there for some countries, and you're like, this is not enough for me to hold information to be able to run the payroll. And then you start, you know, getting into that patchwork of extra systems that you need to hold extra information. And I've really been struggling to try to find a system that, well, the salesperson, Trevor, no offense, and deal was not included there, so definitely no offense, would say, yeah, of course, I mean, we can do all countries in the world. But then when you start scratching, it's configurable. So, but that still means that you need the knowledge yourself, as in what is the information that I need. So I was actually thinking, I don't know if any of you guys have run into a system where you're saying, well, an HR system that has all, and I'm going to use air quotes, the information that I need to hold my payroll data kind of worldwide. That's something that I'm really interested in. And we've looked into a good number of systems, and they always end up falling short in really providing that full overview of employee data.
Well, when you think about it, Ronnie, I think it's a great point, right? I know you and I have talked about this a little bit before as well. You know, HR requires some set of data, payroll inherently requires others, right? So when you're talking about HR systems, whether it's a Rippling or, you know, a Workday, you kind of into the spectrum, right? They're just not going to have all the payroll data. They may have the payroll data for the countries in which they process payroll, if they do.
Exactly.
But even then, it's kind of a catch as catch can. So then you're kind of relying on the payroll side of the house. And I think your point, though, is absolutely well taken. they may say they do it, but how do they do it, right? How do they ensure that they're actually maintaining both the HR data on the HR side, but also the payroll data on the payroll side, right? How do you know that what they're telling you is absolutely required to run payroll in Germany or Kazakhstan or Colombia is actually that? So, again, kind of, yes, we do. How? Show me.
Exactly.
Right?
And until you really, then start looking into, well, this is the data that I need, to your point, in Kazakhstan and in Colombia, but to really go through, lists of data fields and making sure before you make a selection of a tool. But in the end, even though we're saying, okay, I need an HR system, what you're really thinking in the back of your mind is, I want a system that at some point will connect to payroll. So I kind of want both data sets to be in there, because I don't want an HR system and then something on the side to complement. But yeah, Catherine, to your point as well, I mean, even Workday acknowledges that not all of the data for payroll is in the HR system, and they've got a pretty comprehensive one. So yeah, that really is one of my struggles, to find something that is more mid-market, and not something configurable, but something already configured. Yeah, that's one of the big quests for the moment.
Yeah, and we have the same issue because we have our own international entities, and so I think what we're trying to figure out there is like, because Paycor doesn't have their own international payroll, and that's what I feel like you find with a lot of the US ones, right? They don't have their own international payroll, but they can integrate. And again, like, okay, well, what is that integration? Is that a full integration?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like? Because the data does need to go both directions, right? So, but I agree with you. We've run into the same thing, and we've never been able to find one system that does all the HR stuff plus international payroll.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Very good. I'm just thinking, Kathy, you were talking earlier about the scenario-based assessments. Would you mind expanding a bit on that? Because I'm making some assumptions here that, when you're walking into these technologies, we all know the world is going to be completely different in, well, I was going to say 12 months, but 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, especially with AI and all these other things. So how do you do that? Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and I've been doing this for a very long time, so they might be a little dated. So I apologize in advance. But one of them, for example, is working in a union shop or a company with a lot of works councils, right? So there are a lot of rules around who can work when, job replacements, kind of job filling, kind of slotting, all that kind of stuff, right? Kind of shift fills, etc. So you ask that question and they say, yes, we can handle complex union or works council's requirements. Okay. The scenario would be, I have this employee, right? He or she goes out on, accepts overtime perhaps, but then goes out on leave or accepts a promotion and then goes out on leave. And so that's filled. And then the jobs below it are filled. They're filled by seniority, for example, but then somebody else goes out, or then they decide they don't want the promotion after all, which they're allowed to do in a lot of cases. So now you've already got these people that have slotted into another position. How does that go back, and how do you handle that? Well, that's a really complex scenario, but it doesn't apply to everyone. But if it applies to you, that's really, really important because it's a freaking nightmare, right? So it's that kind of thing that's different. Another example, right? So this is a really long time ago, but little company called, and I don't think there's anybody on here from the company, little company called IKEA. I might have heard of them, right? Love that store. And by design, their stores are such that when you go in, you have to follow the path, right? You follow the path through the store. And I remember I heard at the time that the chief HR officer speaking at an event. This is probably literally 20 years ago, and he was talking about our HR processes for the most part are like any other retailer or sort of large box store. But what's different about us is how we attract and hire our associates. And we went through this exercise and we determined that our best sales associates are people who like to shop in our shops, our stores. And the best way to get those is while they're in the store. So, if you're walking through the store, oh, wouldn't this be a fun place to work? Right. And so what they ended up doing, what that meant to them is, again, very long time ago, they decided to put kiosks for applicant management, for applicant entry in their store. So at like 5 distinct like turning points, when you follow the path through the store, at like a bunch of different spots. There were kiosks. Hey, like what you see? Want to join us? Apply here. And that was, again, it was just another example of a process very different, unique for them. The hiring process was their competitive advantage. And so how do we make that different? And that was a scenario. So does whatever software they chose support that kind of functionality? And so again, very specific to them. So I hope that makes sense and they're not too dated.
No, Kathy, I know I put you on the spot there a little bit with that question, but no, that's really insightful. And whilst this is very slightly off topic, I was just thought it might be of interest. A couple of years ago, I was in Poland, and there was a big push for tech companies there, and one of the competing companies had managed to gain the contract in the gym of the technology company above to promote all of their services. I think the competitor organization didn't realize, and so the whole gym was kitted out with the competitor branding and everything, which I thought was both cheeky and quite smart, but very similar to what you're saying about IKEA at the checkouts. I just wish in IKEA they put the meatballs in the cafe at the front, not at the end, but there you go. Just me.
You have to work them
There's
off.
no other way to get there either. You have to go through. Rude.
And the smell
One
is
question-
wafting through until you're following them, right?
Yeah, that's how they get you to the end, right? One question I did hear though, there's some shortcuts in IKEA, but anyway, there you go. Someone else done it. One broad question I'd like to throw out. We did a roundtable a few weeks ago on blind spots, quite a general topic on things to consider when you're expanding internationally, and that was very interesting. Went in a lot of directions, but I'm curious to ask the same question to all of you about, what blind spots would you say you have experienced or can share your knowledge on when it comes to technology platforms and deciding on what to acquire and which way to take it. Would anyone like to comment on that? So things people might not have considered when they're going into the process.
Yes, yes. So Mike and I and our finance team, we all started the shopping, thinking we needed what we needed for HR, hiring, recruiting, all that fun stuff. We never thought to ask our IT department to join that search, never. And now we've, combined our efforts with them. So we've got learning management and performance evaluations and benefits. And, so we've got every aspect of a working platform and the people that will help manage it for us on these calls to, evaluate what we need, how it'll work. And I got to tell you, having them added to the picture has been a godsend, because they came up, Taylor, with that list of must-haves, would be nice to have. Mike and I and the rest of our smaller team did not think to do that. We just went in and said, hey, can you do this? And we took their yes for a yes, So I would highly recommend that whoever's going to help support that system is also on the call so they can ask the technical questions. That's my 2 cents.
That's a really interesting point, Debbie, actually, because obviously being in HR, although you have a view of everything that's going across the company, it's very difficult to actually put yourself in the minds of the employees in the other departments. So even though we'd, made sure that the majority of our needs and requirements have been met, fundamentally, we'd actually missed some very key components that probably would have resulted in the other departments crashing. So we've actually wasted a lot of time there and avoided a lot of damage control. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that point, because when we were looking at Rippling a year and a half ago, it was actually around the same time that our finance and accounting manager was starting. So we were like in the very end of the decision process, and it also had payroll. And I think that even though we were near the end, I should have included her and gotten her feedback on at least the payroll piece, because it ended up that it didn't have the things she needed. And she struggled through that for months and months. And then that's why she finally left Rippling from a payroll perspective and got onto Paylocity. And so now we have this Rippling HRIS, Paylocity payroll, which is not ideal for, for a lot of reasons. There are errors that can happen because you have to get reports from Rippling for payroll. And so great point, not just IT, but anyone else that's going to be using and has needs in that HRIS. So that's a really great point.
Very good. Trevor, I'm just thinking about you, Trevor, from deal point of view. Is there anything from the other side of the fence that you've noticed that, that you're educating your potential customers on what what questions are they not asking that maybe they should be asking?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think to echo what Debbie and Mike just said, right? The one thing that I've seen in my almost 2 full years at Deal Now, and just in a career in sales, has been that sales, and I think you can probably all attest to this, as we've talked about now, it's not a linear decision anymore, right? There are so many different parties involved, and that's one thing that at least I know my specific team at Deal does a very good job of trying to enforce, is that when we can tell that there is a fit or there is some sort of overlap in terms of what the client is looking for and what we can offer, we try to bring in as many, I won't even call them stakeholders, but as many other relevant parties as possible to do a more comprehensive ironing out process, right? Because that is something that we see quite frequently, is where you'll get 3-4 months down the road in a sales process, and then to the point of what Taylor mentioned, like somebody new will join the org, and that stuff happens all the time, and questions come up, right? But if we can get those people involved sooner the better, right? I think that those questions are going to be ironed out much sooner. So there's not much of a question specific or topic specific education process, but just looping in as many people that don't normally fall into the parallels of HR and payroll, I think is a really, really solid move when evaluating vendors.
Yeah, and I would echo what Trevor is saying, probably even take it a stretch further. And Taylor, I love the idea of, putting together a list of pain points that you as a user have had, and not leaving it in the hands of a procurement team who will probably, look at ticking the boxes, but not necessarily understanding the pain, and missing out on a lot of stakeholders in a decision process just because it is managed by someone who in the end will not be using whatever the system is that you're going to end up with. So completely echo what Trevor is saying there.
And this is random, but I'm happy to share the list that we made. I totally understand that, like, you guys will have different requirements, but maybe it like helps you think about like, oh, I didn't even think about, like, yeah, like, to your point, Kathy, of like the scenarios. That's brilliant, because you're exactly right. And I would never come across those scenarios, but we have our own that you guys might not, which, thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, how can an HRIS solve every person's every problem? But I think it's that majority thing and the must-haves for your organization. But I think the list did help, and that's exactly what I did. Was like, when I was going through, I would be like, oh, this is something that I need to have, that I don't think of on the spot. So it's something that I made over weeks' time,
Something that's I usually watch back through these roundtables after to kind of really listen in more detail at what people are saying. But one of the things that's kind of shouting out at the moment is coming back to the point earlier, Taylor, when I was asking you about, is it worth using a consultant like Kathy's old role, or or similar? Some may choose to, some may do it themselves. But what I'm hoping and would love some feedback on is, would it be useful if we somehow pull together at least a kind of boilerplate checklist of questions that could be asked to any given vendor to save people, anyone new to selecting a new platforms, what kind of things they should be asking? Would that be useful? Maybe not for those that have already gone through this process, but for those that haven't, I'm kind of thinking that might be something, might be a bit of a shortcut. I can see Mike nodding there, so I know you're working closely with Debbie on this, Mike, aren't you, at the moment?
Yeah, that's.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, sorry, no, I didn't mean to override. Yeah, that's right. So I'm based in the UK, Debbie's in the US. So I actually look after our recruitment, but I kind of thought, well, we have no one in the UK currently looking after HR. So I gave Debbie a holler and I said, well, look, I'm doing my CIPD. I'll get involved in the UK HR. But yeah, absolutely. I think one point I just wanted to kind of raise is, I guess there's that danger, isn't there, of kind of paralysis by over-analysis. And I guess that could be applied to everything, not just in HR tech, for instance. So I guess sometimes, there comes a point at which you just have to kind of pull the trigger and say, well, look, it doesn't tick everything, particularly if you're getting other parties involved, right? At what point do you just say, let's give this a go, particularly if you're early at your stage in terms of maturity, right?
Yeah. Has anyone got anything?
Oh, sorry. Just to your point, Chris, I do think that like having a, like you said, like a basic boilerplate, something to start from is really helpful. And then I think maybe from there, each person or each, group or company will be able to then, use that and add to it for their own needs, right? Like, so for like me, like with the performance management or OKRs and one-on-ones, like we really wanted to be able to, I mean, for me, like in 15.5 we use for performance, but like I can't have insight into, are these people doing their one-on-ones? Are they actually completing them? I can't see what people are doing and if they're completing stuff. From my perspective, we have an accountability problem. So like I need to see that to be able to be like, hey, you're not doing this or whatever. So just little stuff like that, or like I want to be able to calendar one-on-ones from the HRIS. Like I want someone to be able to go in there and then sends that, you know what I mean? So there's little things like that that like maybe it's important to you and no one else cares about. But to your point again, I think the boilerplate of like getting people started in each of these areas, I think would be helpful.
And
That, Taylor,
particularly
I might.
probably, oh,
Sorry, Vero.
sorry,
Go
I
on.
was going to say, and probably particularly not to forget about any specific areas, right? Back to the blind spots of earlier on. You might just be very focused on kind of the HR users case, not necessarily what does the employee experience or what will guys at, InfoSec and IT say about having a system. So just to make sure that you got kind of the all round.
Definitely.
Taylor, in all seriousness, I might ping you afterwards and see
Yeah.
what kind of questions you've been asking as a starting point, and then we can use that and then build in some, if you don't mind, that is, of course.
No, I'll send it over to you for sure. I'll even send you the responses I got if anyone cares, if they want to see what Paycor and Paylocity responded. Very similar, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, sounds great. I'm sure that'll be really valuable, and you guys can compare notes, and then we'll share it around. At the moment, the WhatsApp channel seems to be the main place for sharing this stuff, but we can also ping it around on emails to you all and so forth. Very good. Just coming back to briefly to the AI topic, and I know that's not strictly under the umbrella at the moment, but I'm just curious, particularly because we were thinking we've had some feedback at the moment that doing a session around AI being such a hot topic at the moment might be useful in the new year. I just wanted to see if anyone's got any experience yet working with AI from an HR context, or anything indeed they want to comment on it before we move on to something else.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments. Perhaps it's I work typically with the larger vendors, so Workday, SAP, Oracle, etc. And they've of course been very, very vocal about what the capabilities are. My own company, we're global payroll. We've incorporated AI into some of the things that we're doing, just kind of getting into that. But what I've seen from I guess two pieces to it. One is in terms of the power of it. So things like write a job description. Right, it's really, really good at taking, especially the kind of this next gen stuff, right? The ChatGPT stuff or whatever. Much more intelligent around kind of taking that to the next level and actually automating some of this stuff and making it easier, right? I started out my career again a very long time ago, writing job descriptions. That was my first job, right? And that was how I honed my skills, whatever. And I literally probably wrote 500 job descriptions. The first few years of my career, I worked for Kodak, so we had a lot of jobs, right? And so now watching, and all three of the vendors, I went to all three of their customer events this fall. All three of them demoed that process around kind of writing a job description and even writing performance appraisals, et cetera. So it's real. So it's there. It's real. The applications are relevant and powerful. But what I will also, we were actually talking about this a little bit with some other folks earlier in the week, is that it's great and it's cool to know that it's out there, but it's also kind of sort of big picture stuff or big stuff, right? We're still worrying for the most part about getting the basics knocked, right? Like handling the functionality, doing integrations, right? So it's great that it's out there, but we're still doing to use a very American phrase, kind of doing the basic, blocking and tackling as well. So it's cool that this stuff is out there. We can think about it and it's fun, but we're still working on, in my case, getting people paid, right? Running the right recruitment process so you're getting the right people in the door, whatever it might be. So it's kind of an interesting, it's very Star Trek-y, but it's real, but most of us aren't quite there yet, on a kind of a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, completely agree. It almost sounds like you're playing at two levels at the same time, right? Trying to get like the basics, the integration, an API that goes back and forth, that brings all the information. But at the same time, we're thinking about AI, and it's going to do all of those fancy stuff. And it's going to just look at payroll results and surface the differences and explain why there was a difference and everything. And you're like, okay, well, that sounds cool. And there are some demo scenarios that are out there that is doing it, and I'm quite amazed. But at the same time, it's crazy that the next meeting that you then have is about, well, the integration didn't run and the file is stuck somewhere, and you're like, okay, we're back, like it feels 30 years almost in 10 minutes, right?
Just what did you find, Kathy? I know, Cindy. I just wanted to say hello to you, by the way. Sorry, you're off the side of my screen, so good to see you again. I
Thank
know.
you.
I'll come to you in a few minutes, but Kathy, just I know you were at the Workday Rising event a few weeks ago. Just curious, what were the sort of key topics and themes at that event? Is it stuff we've already covered today, or was there anything else that you'd like to add from that?
Yeah, that was certainly a big one. I was at the Workday event and also the Oracle and the SAP events. They kind of go one right after the other, which is really fun. So thanks, guys. But yeah, so certainly AI is absolutely was the number one um, topic for sure. I mean, they all had their opening keynotes was about that. Were about that. Again, they kind of demoed all of it, what it can do. The other key topic though continues to be, to your point, Taylor, connectivity, right, and kind of bringing in those systems, sort of the combination of best of breed, sort of, but best of breed within a single platform. And then if it's not, then how do you make it almost feel like it is? Right. So too, I think somebody was mentioning the I don't remember which, I had too many conversations today, was around kind of the Apple example, right? So I think it was Trevor that you were mentioning that, right? So you kind of bring in, you do what you can and what you're really good at, but you also make it easy to bring in other pieces because you realize like not everybody, you just can't do it all. Right. So make it as easy as possible to have those other pieces sort of plug and play. And so that the user doesn't necessarily realize or care that they're different. Right. So that was a big piece as well. How do we kind of get to that singular user experience and kind of make it as easy as possible? So those are probably the two big ones. Reporting is always out there, of course, global reporting and analytics and all that kind of yucky duck stuff too. But those are probably the big ones.
Yeah, I was just going to comment and say, like, guys, I use ChatGPT almost every day in my job. I'm not gonna lie. And I am not afraid to tell everyone that. Like, I use it for, like, I don't know, I'm creating a policy. I am trying to write a letter, an agreement. I'm trying to, I don't know, like, I will just go to it, like, I need to do a sales incentive program here, and I tell it a story. I'll be like, hey, this is blah blah blah, blah. It's a paragraph or so, and it'll pump it out, and like, maybe I have to tweak what I said, or maybe I have to take it and I tweak that actual thing. Or like, I'm doing a culture plan. Like, hey, give me some ideas. This is our culture. This is what we're about. And it spits it out. Like, I use it all the time. And not saying it's perfect, but if you try and you give it some good information, it does an amazing job. And I try to tell people, like, it's just a time saver. It's not like, and some of the ideas are crap, but most of them are pretty cool. And you're like, that makes sense, so I am all for it. I haven't actually seen it inside an HRIS yet, but like, I just use ChatGPT as is on the daily.
Well, you're the use case. That's literally what they show
Yeah,
in the demo.
really?
So you're exactly talk to it,
That's
and that's what
awesome.
it does. So you're spot on. Exactly what they
Yeah,
show. It's
I
awesome.
love it.
Yeah, I would add there, Taylor. We just released. It's in beta right now. We call it Deal AI. It's really original, but it was something that we developed in partnership with ChatGPT, right? So it's taking the whole process of using the tool, but instead of searching ChatGPT at its entirety, it's searching our knowledge base that was previously for internal purposes only, right? So that when people would come to us with a question, we would be able to go into our resources and come to you with an answer, right? And it's not intended to replace that process. We still want to encourage people to come to their dedicated people. But if you do have a quick question, like what's the termination process for an employee in Saudi Arabia, right? Like you can type that into Deal AI and we'll pull together all the steps and the documents and things that are expected of you. And again, there's always going to be a prompt at the end of like speak with somebody on the team, right? But it's exciting to see how that's going to change too. And like I said, it's in beta, so it's super, super early and a small handful of people are using it. But I think more and more companies are going to do that just over time because it's
Time saver.
the very obvious next step. Yeah.
Right. And there's things that I put in there where I'm like, I know the process, I know how to do this, but like, let me
Right.
see what ChatGPT says. And maybe like they have something I missed or whatever. And it's like, ooh, you know,
Right.
it's like an exciting little, I don't know. I love it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think applications to like scan quickly through a lot of knowledge, and I'm thinking about, you know, legal updates or changes that are upcoming, etc. But getting it from the right sources. So as AI evolves and you're able to really like screen through, not, you know, just Twitter, but some real good sources, that is really going to be a boost as well. For, you know, an HR, a payroll function, you need to have quick info about what is whichever process in Saudi Arabia. You want the latest updated one. You don't necessarily, no, and I'm talking against my own shop here, but you don't necessarily want to go to a consultant and ask them about processes in Saudi Arabia. You just want it on hand. You don't want to pay for a report for that. And I know that I'm going to have to evolve my product, obviously.
All of us,
but,
right? All of us.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the way. That's the right evolution, I think. It's not logic that we still need to go through the pain of researching multiple sources, where you're saying, well, intuitively, that it should be one of the good applications of AI.
Yeah,
you save the people for the sort of the real value add, right? Applying the additional intelligence, which presumably we still have, at least until we take over.
Exactly.
Right, but yeah.
At least for a couple of years, right?
A couple more years than that, but we'll see. Cindy, I just wanted to bring you in, but I know we're getting kind of close. We've got 5 minutes left. So is there anything you want to add to this?
Oh, thank you, Chris. Thanks, Emma, for help. I'm late for this meeting, but I really used a ChatGPT. I love it. Just like, my personal assistant. I think it's very easy when you ask questions. Like we try to get latest data. I try to write an email to a searching agency. What could be polite, could be legally right, and then anything that we want to use to twist. It's just perfect. I really love it. Yeah, thanks. Good to join this conversation indeed. That's very interesting because we are looking for next year merit because a lot of unknown uncertainty, whether we would do it, how much percentage we should do, and how can we do that? So that's something very interesting to hear from all the roundtable here today, what you find. So that's my questions for today's topic. Besides the AI. All right. Summarize all too quickly in 2 minutes. Thanks.
No, it's great, Cindy. Does anyone want to comment on Cindy's points there? Anything to add? And we'll send you, Cindy. I know you weren't able to join till later. The recording will be available as well, so you can. There was a lot spoken about earlier on, obviously, so we'll send you that so you can have a look. It might answer some of your questions as well. Just as we're getting close to the end, I'm just mindful. Amanda, Greg, Casey, is there anything you guys want to add into this as well, just before we get close to wrapping up?
Just a quick comment from me, Chris, in terms of when people go out and explore various, I'll say, tools, one thing I've always found, and I recommend to people that I work with, is from a customer service, customer rep, customer manager perspective, ask your vendor what their turnover is in terms of people in those areas. Because you'll find that people are more happy with vendors who have lower turnover in their customer service, customer manager experience areas than those that do not. I mean, I've talked to people who have worked with various vendors where they've had turnover of customer service reps, customer experience managers, where over a 1 year period of time, they might have dealt with 5 to 7 people. And that becomes frustrating if you lose that person. So that's another key area to think about as you look out for vendors.
Yeah, that's a great point. Been there.
In that same vein, it is a really super good point. Related is also when you're doing your references, ask them for a reference of somebody who's left them, because every single vendor has them, right? And see what, how was the offboarding process? Because that's just, it's great when you're buying a new car, but when you take it in for service afterwards, not so much. So ask them about the offboarding too.
Yeah.
And I would even say, just generally speaking, think about the end of your contract. At some stage, you will either outgrow it, or you will shrink, or you will want something different. But just how does it look like at the end? How do I get my data out? In what format do I get my data out? Believe it or not, I remember working with a vendor who would return the data in a PDF. Yeah, hadn't asked about it to start with. So there you are. You've got all your beautiful data, and you can start like double typing.
That was actually one of my main questions, was transferring the data, because I was like, well, we have, we've now built our personnel files in Rippling. How do I transfer those easily into the new system? And neither Paycor nor Paylocity nor a lot of them that I've talked to, you can't do bulk uploads, which is like, what? How have you not thought of that yet? But so there's like a company that could help us, or we have to do them one by one. But to your point, it's the same thing, right? Is like, yeah, ask these questions that you don't think about asking. Is like, what's offboarding look like? Because usually when you say we're leaving, they're like, bye. They don't want to help you with anything.
No,
So
or they're trying to get
it's a
more money out of
struggle.
you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a good point.
No, thanks. Really interesting. Yeah, so Amanda, Casey, I don't want to put you on the spot. Is there anything else you guys want to add before we wrap up? If not, it's no problem, but just want to bring you in.
This has been a great conversation. It's great to hear what HR professionals are dealing with daily and what they're looking forward to in the future. So I appreciate everyone's input, and thanks again for letting me join.
And I'll just add, I have more experience in the HCM tech side of things, that having that list and having the decision makers on those calls actually makes the HCM side of the house jobs easier. And it helps them manage their timelines and their pipelines too. So I think you're doing everything right. And the only other thing I would ask would be about the integrations. If they do have a software in-house, like the ATS is built in, if they acquired that ATS, make sure they actually talk to each other, because just being in the industry, they can acquire an ATS and it's actually not integrated into the platform yet. So if that's a value add that you're looking to go with one of the big guys with, definitely make sure the systems are actually talking, especially if it was a recent acquisition.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, really good points. Really good. I had a couple more questions, but we're getting very close to the time now. But just really, really briefly before we head, has anyone got any comments in relation to the security side when it comes to HRIS? And we could probably do a separate topic on that anyway, but any thoughts around that?
Our COO, there's the SOC 2 compliance, like we ask those questions, and they give us the documents. I don't know nor care. That sounds bad, but as long as they have what they need to have, it's great. But another thing that comes up is, for international companies, is GDPR. So that's something to, which I think most companies by now are have that set up, but that's also another thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it's almost a topic on its own, right? If we start digging into that, and I think earlier on I mentioned, right, about making sure that you've got all the categories of people, and info security and IT being one of them, because I think a bit to Taylor's point as well, for a lot of HR professionals, that's more like they need to be happy, but I'm not too sure what they really look after. So that's almost a world on its own.
I was hesitant to answer the question right at the end, to be honest, but we've had so much to talk about that it's not had a chance to really bring it up, but I'm sure we'll do that as part of the follow-up. So I'll just want to wrap up really quickly. First of all, thank you all for attending today, and for those of you that have been across the series, thank you very much. I hope you've all enjoyed it and got a lot from it. We certainly have.